I think it's probably fair to say this talk is, in some ways, a spiritual successor because it's called Fiat is Retarded. And joining us to talk about this is Alan Farrington. He's an author and an investor, and he'll be explaining a little bit about some of these ridiculous beliefs that are easily refuted by basic logic. So everybody, please put your hands together and welcome Alan Farrington.
All right, so Fiat is retarded. Thank you, that's the end of my talk. I'm good. No. What cryptic meaning could I possibly have in mind here? Well, as Giacomo had to explain last year, and I actually just stole his slides, the meaning you're probably assuming is the colloquial derogatory meaning, extremely stupid. Note also that it is politically incorrect and generally to be avoided in the present-day United States cultural context. I like, by the way, that this isn't actually part of the definition. This is a usage note, so it's pretty much the dictionary well actuallying you. And also, given this kind of thought-policing bullshit is probably the US's third largest export after inflation and war, I'm not particularly inclined to care. So I do want to keep this in mind, though. I want to come back to this notion of political correctness later in the talk, but I want to sow some seeds, lay the groundwork a bit more first. So for the time being, this is the meaning I'm going to pretend that I mean, right? Delayed in development, hindered, impeded. Because I think it's easy to forget, if your starting point is the attention-sapping cauldron of the website formerly known as Twitter. The issues that we're debating with our no-coiner colleagues were largely put to bed at least 100 years ago, if not more. So if you think ordinals being discussed and discarded in 2013 is bad, wait until I tell you about inflationism. So here's Mises from 1912, and I'm not going to read the entirety of this quote, or any that I put up on the screen, but just to pull out some choice excerpts. Stimulate economic activity by means of additional credit must necessarily lead to crisis and depression. This is from 1912. Maybe that's not old enough for you. How about 1755? Richard Cantillon, or Cantillon, if you're feeling a bit more francophilic, writes what I think is fair to call one of the first treatises in economics. It substantially predates The Wealth of Nations. And in this excerpt, he describes the Cantillon effect. Now, obviously, he doesn't call it that. But the point here is that this is not new. Fiat is new. Fiat is delayed in development. Fiat is retarded. What about 1625? Francis Bacon, in his essay on usury, laments that in the end of the game, most of the money will be in the box. I don't know if SBF was intentionally referencing this or not. We may never know. I encourage you to read this essay, by the way. Admittedly, I am taking this quote out of context because Bacon weighs up the pros and the cons of usury. Now, the pro, I think fairly obviously, is incentivizing capital allocation towards productive enterprises. But the fact that he considers cons at all is just not something that you would ever hear today, right? I really don't think that any mainstream fiat economist is honest enough, or frankly even educated enough, to appreciate the potential significance of this. Or if they are, they're certainly not going to say it in public. Speaking of intellectual dishonesty and nobody ever admitting anything, have you heard of the cover-up of the failure of the Bank of England's war loan in 1914? Following which they basically printed the difference and forced themselves off the gold standard a number of years later. If you haven't heard of this, I wouldn't blame you, really, because pretty much everybody involved with the complete and utter fraud of what actually happened took their secrets to the grave. The public at large wasn't told until over 100 years later when this blog post went up on the Bank of England website. There's a QR code there if you want to chase down the original source here. I'll do that a couple more times. Usually I'll linger a bit on the slide if you do want to scan it. Note that Keynes called it a masterly manipulation, by the way. What a swell guy. Also, fun fact, if you click on this link, you get nothing at all, peasant. So this is basically the New York agreement, right? This is like the London agreement. The GovCoin core devs hard forked it to insert an inflation bug. They lied about it literally forever, and they got away with it because Fiat is closed source. So far, so retarded. But it gets even worse because remember, delayed in development, hindered, impeded. It's not just the supply of fiat and therefore fiat prices. It's everything that fiat touches. I'm sure we're all familiar with WTF happened in 1971. And I'm not going to go through all these charts, or really any of them, because I feel like kind of the point of WTF happened in 1971 is the sheer overwhelming weight of shit and decay and retardation, right? Fiat is impeding and hindering the growth of everything that it comes into contact with, basically by distorting our ability to even perceive time properly. Now, we all know why this is. Savings is the bedrock of civilization. There we go. You have to produce before you consume. Inflation is a stealth tax on savers and producers. It subsidizes the return on parasitism, that is to say politics, as opposed to production. It distorts everybody's time preference so that nobody can think long term, even if you are aware of this, never mind if you are not. This makes everybody relatively more selfish, materialistic, and desperate than they would have been otherwise. Ironically, exactly the things that the statist inflationists are claiming to solve. As usual, they are the cause, all of which depreciate social capital and hence the ability to accumulate any capital at all. So, fiat is extremely stupid, fiat is delayed in development, and fiat is inhibiting the growth of civilization. Great. Here's the problem with all of this. If you are willing to think clearly, if you're willing to reason honestly, if you're not retarded, basically, this is all completely obvious, right? There are no rational defenses of inflationism. There are ignorant defenses, and there are fake, dishonest defenses. But if you try to pin anybody down about any of this, all you are going to get is deflection and lies. So the point of this talk isn't so much to convince you, audience here, anybody watching online now or later, because I'm pretty sure that you agree with this. As far as I'm concerned, the question you shouldn't be asking is fiat retarded? But rather, why does anybody still need to be convinced? It's a cliche that we are so early, right? But why? Now, some of you may not like where I have come to on this. I'm starting to think that there are a lot of people who are simply never going to get it. It may be forced on them one day, sure, but they're never going to get it by reasoning. And here is why. It is useless to attempt to reason a man out of a thing he was never reasoned into. A lot of people think Jonathan Swift said that, but he did not. And even there, there's a lesson. People think he said that because they've heard it over and over and over again. Normies, for the most part, were never reasoned into fiat, and hence, I fear, cannot be reasoned out. They believe in it because propaganda works. So, that's the black pill. What do we do from here? Do we just accept that normies are, at some point, someday, who knows how far in the future, just going to be dragged kicking and screaming into hyper-Bitcoinization? I mean, honestly, maybe. But I think we can be a bit more bullish than this. So just because they can't be reasoned with doesn't mean that they can't still be influenced. And this brings us full circle to the dictionary's earnest concern with when we can and cannot say the word retarded. Normies, pre-coiners even, I should say, I should be a bit more polite. Pre-coiners were never convinced of the merits of fiat by any reasoning or observation or some combination of the two. They believe in it because it's politically correct, is my view. Now, this might seem a bit, I don't know, lame, goofy even today, using political correctness this way, as kind of an insult or anything allegedly profound, but it was originally a Bolshevik concept. So you can see this excerpt from its entry in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Basically, it was used to distinguish what the communists would like for you to believe from what is actually true. So I'm just going to let that sink in. What the communists would like for you to believe. Right? The communists would certainly like for you to believe in fiat, by the way. Point 5 of the Communist Manifesto demands the centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. And this is a punchline. You cannot reason with these people. You can only make fun of them. They need to be mocked. They need to be satirized. There needs to become, in my view, a general feeling of unambiguous lameness in supporting fiat. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to give some suggestions as to how we can try to bring this about. Now, you've got to tailor it to your audience, maybe fairly obviously. So we'll start off assuming reasonable intelligence, if still high susceptibility to propaganda. So you wouldn't ever do anything unless it would take you longer next year. This is the actual real fiat argument against deflation. I promise you I'm not joking. Not only is the official policy of every major global central bank, as this Fortune article details, another QR code for you, not only are these policies completely made up, don't worry, don't worry, go back. That's kind of the point. Is that not the most retarded thing that you have ever heard? This article gets even funnier, by the way. It goes on through the standard argument that if prices were falling, no one would ever do anything. But it then suggests that actually this process can just continue forever. Can you imagine that? Prices falling indefinitely. How horrible. But then it goes on to suggest even further that this fundamental variable from state-of-the-art macroeconomics, it doesn't even pop out of some differential equation. It's actually completely made up. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. It was made up by the New Zealand finance minister during a TV interview. Now, this Mises.org article gives a slightly more critical examination of this historic episode, quoting the finance minister in question as saying that the figure was plucked out of the air to influence the public's expectations. So this is maybe still a little bit intellectual, so we can try to ground it a bit more in everyday experience. Nobody's ever either bought a computer or invested in the production of computers. The fact of Moore's law playing out the way it has obviously debunks this all on its own, right? Whatever your computing needs are, however you define them, they've been getting exponentially cheaper for at least 60 years. So if this retarded fiat bullshit about deflation causing deflation until we all starve and die were remotely true, then anybody wanting to compute something in 1970, say, just to pick where this chart happens to start, they would still be waiting for this horrific deflation to end. And by the way, Moore's law is actually a specific case of something known as Wright's law. ARK Invest, probably well known to Bitcoiners, have a really good article on their website about this. If you want something slightly more academic, I can recommend this paper by Farmer and Lafon. What Wright's law basically says is that every technology gets cheaper at some or other rate that links its price to its cumulative production. And it just so happens that the global semiconductor industry has compounded capital at so consistent a rate that allows Moore's law to effectively cancel a variable and express itself as unfolding across time. Now, the reason I'm going out of my way to cover this is to round off this argument that it is incredibly obvious and entirely well understood that real prices fall as a result of capital accumulation and nominal prices rise as a result of money printing. Neither either are or are affected by metaphysical abstractions, as Saylor likes to put it, acting on the economy. So the next time some midwit tells you that we need low and stable inflation for a healthy economy, just make them tell you why they've never bought a computer. And then when you just can't take them stammering any longer, call them a retard. It can get even simpler than this, though. I mean, you just put up this chart. This is US federal debt. Just say, you think this is ever getting paid back? Really? Or are you retarded? You think there's going to be no consequences to this? That's interesting. I didn't know you were a retard. It can be even simpler. It doesn't need to be about economics at all. Just start using the word fiat in everyday life. Like, use it the way that Tracy Alloway does here. And don't explain what you're doing, by the way. This is really important. People learn language from context, so make this context their reality, right? As Uncle Bitstein likes to say, this is our meme world. They are just living in it. And I haven't asked him, but I think that when he said that, he was quoting Gandhi. Or, finally, it can be about economics, but it can be so stupid that it's painful to watch. So with that in mind, let's see what the, I believe, former chief economist of the European Central Bank has to say about all of this.
How you create money is very simple. We create money electronically, if I can say. We credit accounts of, well, that people will not understand again. It's an image, you know, so, I mean, this is off now. I could say I print banknotes, but it's an image, you know, it's not the way we do because it goes via the banking system.
But couldn't you
yeah, how would you say that? Because
we lend
nah, but lend, no, it's not, well, no, we create money. It's not lending money, we create money.
Give me a second.
Yeah.
We lend to commercial banks,
That's not
and
true, no, not true.
the moment of this lending creates the money.
No, I see what you mean. But it's not even true what you say. When you've, let me give the, we are not, that's the classical way. Nobody's going to understand what you say. But normally, I would just think about the situation. I print banknotes. In my office, I print banknotes. And with these banknotes, I will buy you something. And I give you this banknote, and you give me a bond that you have bought before. You have a Schatz, you know, you have a treasury bill, you know, in your investment. And then you sell it to me, and I give you cash, which I have produced. But we do that electronically.
Make people watch this. Make them cringe. Make them try to explain this shit show themselves and see if they sound any less retarded. So, I got to wrap up now. Obviously, I'm giving you the bear case here, right? Maybe people aren't quite as retarded as I fear, in which case, great, right? If they can be reasoned with, give them broken money, give them gradually, then suddenly, give them Bitcoin as Venice, maybe as a prank, because it's not about Bitcoin. But if these materials, you know, if it's these books, blogs, podcasts, whatever else, if they help you convince yourself that fiat is retarded, then that's great, but you need to start saying it. There are people who will only respond to propaganda, who were never reasoned into fiat, and hence who can never be reasoned out. And I'm bombarding you with memes, by the way, to reinforce the point that this is how a lot of people imbibe their ideas. So I want you to go out there and convince them that fiat is a terrible vibe. So, is it to be generally avoided in the present-day United States cultural context? No. Go out your way to say it. Live not by lies. Embrace that it is politically incorrect, because that more or less guarantees that it is factually correct. And just to finish up, if you believe, as I think you should, that we are in an informational, if not spiritual war, I would encourage you to heed the advice of probably history's greatest theorist on this subject, Sun Tzu. meme them until they cry, and then make memes about them crying. Thank you very much.